Hi, my name is Savannah, and the book I decided to do my review on is called Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World. It is by Jennifer Armstrong, and it doesn't really have illustrations. What it has are it actually has pictures that a photographer aboard this ship that tried to sail to Antarctica that he actually took. So it's actually really interesting because you get to see firsthand what it actually looked like. And that man's name was Frank Hurley. The author was born in Massachusetts. She now lives in New York. She's an American children's author who's known for both fiction and nonfiction books. This one is actually a winner of the Orbis Pictus Award for Outstanding Nonfiction. So she's an award-winning author. I made my selection because, well, I work at a learning center. We actually have a library, and our books are all ranked by age, so that made it easy. So I just went to the age-appropriate section for this assignment, and I picked the one that I thought looked the most interesting. There was also one about a certain type of bird. Didn't look very interesting. This one, very good. This book is about a crew of men who are attempting an expedition to sail to Antarctica. Only 2 men before them have actually made it there at this point. The voyage starts in 1914. But on their way, their boat, which is a specially built boat from Norway, it's specifically built to last and make it through tough situations of ice. It has thick wooden walls. It talks about the walls being up to 4 feet thick so that it can cut through the ice and continue to sail. Their boat actually gets stuck in the ice. It talks about the ice freezing for like 3 miles in every 15 minutes or so. So the ice freezes out there incredibly fast. And that year, the distance the ice froze out from the continent was much further than it ever had been before that anybody had witnessed. And so they reached the thick, unpenetrable part of the ice way before they thought, and their boat got stuck. And so they were stranded there for 10 months in just their boat, stuck in the ice. Then the ice shifts and refreezes, and it started coming in and crushing their boat. And so eventually their boat gets completely just destroyed and broken inside the ice. And it later eventually sinks under it. So the men have to abandon ship and just camp on this floating ice. They camped on the ice for about 5 months before it started breaking. Well, before they realized that they needed to move because it was going to start breaking. So they take 3 of their smaller lifeboats and they hauled them across the ice, which is this cover picture. And they do that until the ice starts breaking apart so much that they have to sail in 3 tiny little open boats in the middle of the open Antarctic Ocean, which is the most dangerous ocean in the world. They end up making it to Elephant Island. There's a map in here. That shows exactly their pathway. So they leave South Georgia Island. They sail down. They don't make it to Antarctica. They get stuck. Then they float because the ice, when they're camping on it, as the ice freezes, it moves along the coast. So they shifted. Then their boat gets crushed. It sinks. They finally make it after they're sailing to Elephant Island. But Elephant Island is uninhabited. It's called Elephant Island because it is overtaken by elephant seals and some penguins. And so the captain and a few crew members decided to take one of the small boats and sail to South Georgia Island, where they started, to go. There's a whaling town there, and to go get help. And they make it. They send back a boat, and everyone actually survives and is saved. Their entire trip is over a year. It's actually 2 years, from 1914 to 1916. So 7 interesting things that I learned from this book. One is how harsh the landscape really is in Antarctica. I had an idea, but I never had this much of an idea. I learned about how the frozen ice compacts and moves. I never thought a boat stuck in the ice would get crushed. but that happened. I also learned that when the ice compacts and rises, it filters out the salt and the salt sinks, so the men could take the seawater after it froze and then melt it and drink it. Interesting. Leopard seals are terrifying. They would actually jump out of the water and chase the men on the ice and try to eat them. It also talks about how sailors would navigate, finding their latitude and longitude and using books and their watches and compasses. Since this was 1914, they didn't have the sonar and things that we have today. I also learned that Antarctica was just barely being discovered and explored in the early 1900s. And I learned that the captain in this book, his name was Ernest Shackleton, that he was a really amazing man, and he is, I believe, the entire reason that this whole crew made it safely. His leadership skills and how he stayed encouraging and how he kept them on a schedule no matter what. He gave them a reason to work. He did everything that he could have as a captain, and he saved his crew. So the accuracy, the author got the information for her book, researched it through the diaries of the crew. They all kept diaries. They all signed contracts because the captain wanted to, he had plans of actually making their voyage into, I think, a movie. And so he got donors and investors, and he had all the crew members sign contracts, so they all had diaries, so they had all that information stored. And they even had pictures, as I showed you. The category of nonfiction is it is factual and interpretive. It's factual because it talks about an actual time event in history that happened, and it talks about a lot of factual information about the landscape and Antarctica and the men, the crew members. But it's also interpretive because it has quotes from the men, what they said it was like out there, the sounds that they heard. It was their experiences. So I feel like it's a little bit of both. The structure is narrative style. It's just telling you their story. The organizational pattern is a sequence. It starts at the beginning and it goes straight through and tells you just like a very detailed account of what they went through, exactly how it went. The style is it uses descriptive language. It's from a third person point of view, except when it quotes the crew members, then it's from their first person point of view. So an example of that would be, it says, mighty blocks of ice grouped between meeting floes rose slowly until they jumped like cherry stones, squeezed between thumb and finger, Shackleton wrote. And then the noise is very loud, like an enormous train with squeaky axles being shunted with much bumping and clattering, added Worsley. And the organizational tools. There is a table of contents right here. It has the page numbers on it as well. There's a list of all the crew members and their roles. And then in the back there's also an index. And then the graphics, as I showed you, there's maps, there's pictures of the boat, there's the pictures of the crew, there's the captain, lots of pictures. The text enhanced my understanding by painting an extremely vivid and detailed picture of what these men actually went through. It's very detailed. It talks about it shows pictures of the icicles freezing on their face. It talks about how long they were there. It is as if you went through this with them. It's very vivid. It's very descriptive. It talks about the sounds. It talks about the smells. It's like you're completely involved in the story. I would say the age group would be 12 or older. Some of the reading is not too difficult, but there are some contextual words that younger kids wouldn't understand, like them floating on floes, which are the big chunks of ice that they're floating on that aren't quite icebergs, some weird words. And then there's some kind of graphic material that younger kids shouldn't read. There's a part where they have to eventually kill off all their sled dogs because they can't survive if they're giving that much of their food to their dogs. So it talks about them having to shoot them. Kind of hard to explain that to a little kid. And then lastly, I would definitely recommend this book. It was amazing. I'm so glad I chose it and that I read it. Thank you.